Back in 1958, the heart of Chicago was like a ticking time bomb. Across the nation, the fight for equal rights was heating up, shaking the foundations of the old ways. Up in the Bronzeville neighborhood, you could feel a heavy pressure in the air, like a storm was about to break. Standing right in the middle of all that heat was Bumpy Johnson. The cops hated him and called him a disease. They saw him as a criminal who ran the illegal gambling spots and ruled the streets with a heavy hand. But for the folks living in Bronzeville, he was a hero who looked out for them, a strong man who refused to back down when everyone else tried to crush him. However, a famous TV newsman named Silas Thorne saw things differently. Silas hosted the nightly show Metropulse and viewed Bumpy Johnson as a pest that deserved to be crushed during a live broadcast. Silas Thorne was the golden boy of the local news. He was a rich, polished man with a sharp look and a voice that sounded like smooth honey. Every evening, he sat at a fancy oak desk in his high-rise office, telling families in the quiet outskirts of the city how they should feel and who they should be afraid of. He was stuck up and felt like nobody could touch him. He carried a quiet, nasty prejudice that showed in the way he looked down his nose at people. He didn't use loud insults. Instead, he used fake smiles and questions that were meant to trap people. He truly believed he was better than any black man. Silas was the one who came up with the plan for the interview. He was hungry for more people to watch his show. His station was falling behind the newer programs that were showing the grit of the street protests, and Silas needed a big show to win them back. He planned to drag the boss of Bronzeville into the bright, hot lights of the TV studio. His goal was to make Bumpy Johnson look like a fool in front of 5 million people. He wanted to show the world that Bumpy was just an unlearned bully and destroy his reputation forever. He told the big bosses at the station that he was doing a brave report on the city's underground crime. But behind closed doors, while sharing a drink with his partner, Silas finally admitted his real, mean intentions. "I am going to destroy him," Silas had bragged, spinning the whiskey in his glass. "I'll provoke him until he snaps. Once everyone sees his true nature on camera, the law will have all the reason they need to throw him in a cage for good." When the letter reached Bumpy's high-rise home, his top guys were all against it. "Don't do it," they warned. They knew it was an ambush. They realized a guy like Silas didn't want a friendly chat, he wanted a public hanging. "He's the one holding the mic," muttered Slim, Bumpy's right-hand man, his face full of concern. "He runs the cameras, too. If you walk into his building, you're playing on his turf. He'll twist your words and try to make you look like a clown." Bumpy sat in his chair, looking over the invite. It was written on fancy, expensive paper, posh and rude all at once. He puffed on his cigar, watching the smoke trail up. He knew Slim was correct. It was definitely a setup. But Bumpy Johnson had spent his whole life walking into setups and tearing them apart from the inside. He knew that saying no would look like he was scared. It would seem like he was intimidated by the rich guy in the blazer. And if there was one thing Bumpy wouldn't stand for, it was people thinking he was afraid. "I'm showing up," Bumpy said, his voice quiet but certain. "He thinks he's talking to some low-level crook. He thinks he's meeting a stereotype. He has no idea he's invited a man who studies philosophy and masters the chessboard. Let him build his trap, Slim. I'll be the one who ends up catching him." The morning of the big talk was freezing. A biting wind tore through the streets of the city, making people shiver. Bumpy got ready like a soldier preparing for a major fight. He picked out a dark gray suit made of the finest Italian wool. He put on a spotless white shirt and a deep red silk tie. He set his hat on his head at just the right angle to show he was the boss. Looking in the mirror, he didn't see a criminal. He looked like a high-ranking politician or a wealthy businessman. He looked like the one thing Silas Thorne feared most, a man who was his equal. The ride from the neighborhood to the city center was like traveling between two different planets. As the dark car headed south, crossing the line into the business district, the view shifted. The lively brick buildings and busy corners of the old neighborhood faded away, replaced by the giant glass skyscrapers of the rich. Even the faces of the people walking by changed from brown to white. The atmosphere changed from the lively pulse of jazz and the hustle of the block to the icy, hurried vibe of big business. When the vehicle stopped at the front of the television studio, the coldness was instant. The doorman, a bulky fellow in a fancy gold-trimmed uniform, paused before even touching the car door. He stared at Bumpy, glanced at the driver, and then looked back at Bumpy with a sneer. He pulled the door open but offered no greeting or assistance. His stiff posture made it clear he felt Bumpy was an intruder in this world. Bumpy climbed out, acting as if the man didn't even exist. He strode into the entrance hall, his team following closely. The lobby was a massive temple of stone and gold, ringing with the sounds of busy office workers. The moment Bumpy walked in, the room went silent. Necks craned and eyes popped. Usually, a black man only entered this space if he was there to scrub the floors or deliver lunch. Seeing a black man in a suit that cost more than a guard made in a year, moving with the confidence of a monarch, felt like a shock to everyone there. At the front desk, a young lady greeted them with a forced grin and shaking hands. "Mr. Johnson," she stammered, "Mr. Thorne is waiting for you. But first, our team needs to search you." Two large guards moved in. They were former police officers who looked at Bumpy with pure hatred, their hands hovering near their gear. One guard, a man with a flushed face and a thick build, stepped right into Bumpy's face. "Put your hands up," the guard ordered. Bumpy's muscle, a man named Mace, stepped up ready to fight, but Bumpy signaled him to stay back with just a glance. Bumpy didn't move a muscle. He simply stared into the guard's eyes, holding the look until the big man looked away first. "I am here because Mr. Thorne asked me to be," Bumpy stated in a quiet tone that sliced through the quiet room. "I am a guest. I have no weapons, and my associates have no weapons. If you lay a hand on me, I'm walking out of here right now. I'll head right back to the street," Bumpy continued, "and your supervisor will be left with millions of viewers staring at a vacant seat. By sunrise, I imagine you'll be hunting for a job hauling crates at the pier." The guard froze. He glanced at the pale receptionist and then at the wall clock. The broadcast was starting in 40 minutes. He knew Silas Thorne would destroy his career if the main attraction bailed. Swelling with frustration, the guard stepped aside and muttered under his breath. "Follow me," the lady at the desk whispered, quickly leading them away. They walked through quiet carpeted halls filled with framed photos of powerful white figures, reporters, leaders, and stars. They passed offices where writers sat in thick clouds of tobacco smoke, hitting typewriter keys at high speed. Every time Bumpy passed a doorway, the noise died. People peeked through the glass. A trail of murmurs followed him like a shadow. "That's the guy. That's the mob boss. That's the hitman." They were tucked away in a waiting room. It was tiny, painted a gross shade of tan, and featured a bowl of dry, old fruit. Bumpy knew this was a choice. The rooms for high-ranking officials or Hollywood stars were surely fancy, stocked with top-shelf drinks and fresh bouquets. This space was meant to feel like a cage. It was built to make him feel unimportant and small before the cameras started rolling. Bumpy stayed on his feet, calmly studying the room. 10 minutes later, Silas Thorne stepped inside. In the flesh, Silas was even taller than he appeared on the screen. He was perfectly put together, every hair greased into place and his teeth shining like polished porcelain. He carried the scent of pricey aftershave and pure ego. He didn't enter to greet a visitor. He entered to look at an exhibit. "Mr. Johnson," Silas said. He didn't reach out for a handshake. He stayed by the exit, keeping plenty of distance between them. "I'm surprised you actually came. To be honest, we had a secondary story about flower shows ready just in case. We weren't sure you'd have the guts to face me." "Nobody has ever said I lacked courage, Mr. Thorne," Bumpy replied, turning slowly to look him in the eye. Silas let out a dry, fake laugh. "Well, the alleyways are one thing. This is a nationwide broadcast." "This is a whole different ballgame," Silas continued, his voice dripping with fake concern. "We have standards here, class, manners, and rules. I just wanted to drop by and ensure we're on the same page." He stepped inward, lowering his voice to that insulting, slow tone people use when talking to a pet. "We're going to discuss the South Side," Silas stated. "The gambling, the blood in the streets, the narcotics. I need direct responses. No slang, no street talk. Try to speak properly. The folks watching at home won't understand your talk. Do your best to use real words. I'd hate for us to have to put captions on the screen." It was a total gut punch, a nasty planned insult disguised as helpful coaching. Silas was flat out calling him uneducated. He was treating him like a wild animal. Bumpy didn't even flinch. He didn't scowl or show any heat. Instead, he watched Silas with a look of bored interest, like he was watching a fly buzz around a trash can. "I will try my hardest to be clear, Silas," Bumpy replied. He used the man's first name on purpose. It was a bold move, a quiet way of showing he wasn't intimidated. Silas's face tightened. He couldn't stand being called Silas by anyone, especially someone he looked down on. "It's Mr. Thorne," he snapped back. "On the air, you call me Mr. Thorne." "We'll find out," Bumpy said simply. Silas glared at him for a second, searching for a sign of weakness or a spark of rage. He saw absolutely nothing. With a huff, he turned his back and walked out. "5 minutes until we start. Make sure you're in your seat." Once the door clicked shut, Mace let out a frustrated sound. "Let me just crack his skull, Bumpy. One punch. Let's see how well he talks with a broken mouth." "No," Bumpy said, calmly fixing his sleeve links. "That is exactly the trap. He's begging for the monster. He wants to see the beast. If I swing at him, he comes out on top. If I lose my cool, he wins. Tonight, Mace, we aren't using our hands. We are going to destroy him with the cold, hard facts. And for a man who lives a lie, the truth is more painful than any beating." A nervous kid with a headset popped into the doorway. "Mr. Johnson, it's time." Bumpy stepped out of the tiny room and onto the main stage. The change was overwhelming. The studio was a giant, dark room filled with huge cameras and microphones hanging from the ceiling like vultures. The stage lights were so bright you could feel the heat on your skin. Past the bright circle of the set sat 300 people, nearly all of them white. They sat in the shadows, whispering and leaning forward, desperate to catch a glimpse of the legend from the streets. Silas was already in his spot behind the desk, scanning his papers. He looked like a king on his throne. Across from him sat a single hard wooden stool without any padding. It was another petty jab. Silas was nestled in expensive leather while his guest was expected to sit on a park bench. Bumpy stepped onto the stage, and the crowd went dead silent. The only sound was the steady click of his shoes on the shiny floor. He took his seat on the stiff stool, crossed his legs, and rested his hands in his lap. He looked completely at ease, almost like he was the one hosting the show. A makeup artist scurried over to touch up Silas's face. She paused near Bumpy, holding out a sponge, looking unsure. "I'm all set, sweetheart," Bumpy said with a kind smile. "I don't need a disguise." Silas caught the dig and tightened his grip on his pen. The director started the final count. Half a minute left. The room went still. 10 seconds. The red tally lights on the front of the cameras flickered on. The floor manager signaled Silas. "Good evening," Silas began, his voice shifting into that deep, silky tone that made him famous. "I'm Silas Thorne, and this is Metro Pulse. Tonight's broadcast is unique and, quite honestly, a bit dangerous. We are taking a look into the dark alleys of the South Side, a place of crime, secrets, and brutality. Joining us is the man who sees himself as its leader, even though the law sees him as a disease. Mr. Ellsworth Johnson, known on the street as Bumpy." Silas turned toward Bumpy, his expression becoming cold and serious. "Mr. Johnson," Silas started, moving in for the kill immediately. "I appreciate you being here, though I should probably make sure my wallet is still in my pocket before we get started." A wave of chuckles spread through the crowd. It was a low blow, A tired joke based on a nasty stereotype. Silas grinned, feeling proud of himself. He thought he had already won. He had painted Bumpy as a common crook in the first 10 seconds. Bumpy didn't crack a smile. He didn't even look annoyed. He simply waited for the room to become quiet again. "You are welcome to check your pockets, Mr. Thorne," Bumpy said calmly. "But I think you'll find that the real thieves in this city are the men in the high-rise banks downtown, not the residents of my neighborhood." The room went stone silent. The laughter vanished instantly. Silas's smug look slipped for a heartbeat. He wasn't prepared for a sharp comeback, and he certainly wasn't expecting Bumpy to turn the tables on the city's power structure. "A quick wit," Silas said, brushing the comment aside. "But let's stick to the reality of the situation. You play the part of a local hero and a business mogul," Silas said, his voice rising, "but the police files paint a darker picture. They call you a hunter. They say your gambling operations steal the little savings from the very neighbors you say you care about. How do you live with yourself, taking lunch money from hungry kids just so you can wear fancy foreign suits?" Silas pointed at Bumpy's outfit with a look of pure disgust. Bumpy tilted his head forward. "The street lottery, Mr. Thorne, is simply the stock market for the folks who aren't allowed on Wall Street. The big banks bet millions every single day. When they lose and ruin the economy, the politicians hand them a check. But when a mother on the South Side bets a few cents hoping to keep the lights on, the cops bust in her windows. Why is it called investing in the city center, but crime in my neighborhood? Because it's illegal," Silas barked. "And because it leads to killings and gunfights in the streets. The blood on those sidewalks is on your hands. Are you going to sit there and tell me you've never ordered a man's death?" "I am telling you that I didn't start the fire," Bumpy replied without raising his voice. "The chaos in my neighborhood comes from being broke. It comes from having no hope. It comes from a world that won't give a black man a job doing anything but scrubbing toilets. You want to talk about blood, Mr. Thorne? Let's talk about the blood on the hands of the landlords who let families freeze in the winter. Let's talk about the blood on the hands of the officers who hunt down kids for no reason. I didn't build the wilderness, I just figured out how to stay alive in it." Silas was losing his cool. Bumpy wasn't acting the way he was supposed to. He was supposed to be shaking with rage or making excuses. Instead, he was putting the whole city on trial. Silas decided to go for a low blow. He wanted to shame him. "You have a lot to say about the world," Silas sneered, his voice full of hate. "But the truth is you're just a leech. You rot your own community. You sell lies to people who have nothing. And let's be real, Mr. Johnson, you aren't a scholar. You spent your life behind bars, not in a classroom. You're just a street thug who got a lucky break. Do you actually believe you're smart enough to sit there and talk to me about how the economy works?" It was a total attack on his mind. It was the same old insult, telling a man he didn't know his place, just wrapped in expensive language. The air in the studio felt like it was buzzing. The crowd leaned forward, breathless, waiting for Bumpy to lose his mind and start shouting. They were waiting for a threat. They wanted to hear him growl. Bumpy locked eyes with Silas. He let the quiet drag on, long enough to make Silas shift uncomfortably in his seat. "I might not have a diploma from a fancy Ivy League school, Mr. Thorne," Bumpy said in a low, steady voice. "But I have an education from the hardest prisons in this country. I have an education from streets where you wouldn't survive for 10 minutes. And when it comes to books, I'd wager I've studied more volumes in a prison cell than you've looked at in your whole life. You read words off a screen that someone else wrote for you. I read the story of the world. And history shows me that men like you always believe they are the kings of the mountain, right up until the mountain collapses." Silas's face turned a bright, angry pink. He was losing his grip. The conversation was moving out of his control, and he realized he had completely misjudged the man across from him. He decided it was time for the nuclear option. He had a question saved for the very end, a cruel strike designed to shatter Bumpy Johnson. He had to use it now to save himself. Silas leaned in, his eyes gleaming with a nasty, hunter-like light. He lowered his voice, making it sound fake tender and completely evil. "Let's discuss your family, Bumpy. Let's talk about your little girl. You treat her like royalty. You pay for the best private schools. But everyone knows the reality. Everyone knows that no matter how much cash you throw around or how many silk gowns you buy her, she'll never be part of polite society. She will always be seen as the child of a thug, the daughter of a savage. Do you honestly believe?" Silas stopped, letting the silence fill with tension like a toxic fog. "That you can scrub the stain of your heritage off of her with your blood money? Do you think she isn't secretly embarrassed by what you are?" The room felt like it had been emptied of oxygen. It was a boundary that no decent person would ever cross. This wasn't a news interview anymore. It was a public attack on a man's child, his identity, and his heart. People in the crowd gasped. Even the guys running the cameras went stiff. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered malice. Silas leaned back, a satisfied grin touching his mouth. He was sure he had done it. He had hit the ultimate nerve. Now he just waited for the fire. He waited for Bumpy to jump over the desk and attack him, which would prove every ugly thing Silas believed about him to be true. Bumpy Johnson became perfectly, terrifyingly still. The look on his face wasn't the peace of a calm day. It was the absolute silence in the center of a deadly storm. It was the bone-chilling stillness of a hunter deciding exactly where to strike. He stared at Silas, never blinking. The overhead bulbs mirrored in his eyes, making them look like cold, black glass. Slowly and with total control, Bumpy reached into his jacket. The hired muscle in the wings went stiff, their hands twitching toward their weapons. But Bumpy didn't produce a pistol. He pulled out a sleek silver case, clicked it open, and took out a match. He struck it, and the flame flared bright and hot. He lit his cigar, took a deep breath, and blew a thick cloud of smoke right into Silas Thorne's face. Bumpy leaned in through the haze. His voice dropped to a low hum that everyone in the room could feel in their bones. "You messed up, Silas," Bumpy whispered. "You assumed you were talking to a man who wanted your respect. You thought you could make me feel small. But you overlooked one detail." Bumpy smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Silas had ever witnessed. "You forgot that I don't give a damn about your standards. And you forgot we are live right now, which means nobody can jump in to save you from what I'm about to say." Bumpy glanced at his wrist. "We have 3 minutes before you go off the air." "Perfect. That's plenty of time." In the control booth, the producer was screaming into Silas's ear, "Go to a break. Cut the feed." But Silas was stuck. He was petrified by the stare coming from Bumpy Johnson. He couldn't find his words. He couldn't even twitch. He had opened a door to a dark room he wasn't ready for, and now he was locked inside. Bumpy took another puff, the tip of the cigar glowing like a hot coal. "You wanted to discuss shame, Mr. Thorne. Let me tell you about real shame. And let me share a little secret about your bosses that you didn't think I'd ever find out." Silas's eyes went wide with pure terror. "Let's talk," Bumpy said, "about the real reason they gave you this desk." The red light on the camera stayed on, broadcasting the total destruction of a celebrity to the whole country. The trap had been triggered, but it was the reporter's leg caught in the metal teeth. That red light was like a burning, merciless eye, showing the dead silence of the studio to millions of people in their homes. Silas Thorne sat motionless in his expensive chair, the color leaving his face so fast that his makeup looked like bright paint on a ghost. The mist from Bumpy Johnson's cigar floated between them like a ghost, a gray curtain dividing the predator from his target. Up in the tech booth, the supervisor was screaming and pounding on the equipment, begging to cut to a commercial. But the head director, who recognized a legendary TV moment when he saw one, refused to stop the feed. He realized that what was happening on the set wasn't a chat anymore, it was a public takedown. Bumpy relaxed into the hard chair that was supposed to make him look weak. Instead, it felt like he was sitting on a golden throne. He took another slow puff of the cigar, letting the glowing tip burn bright while he held Silas's frightened gaze with a stillness that was scarier than a punch. "You want the truth about why you're sitting behind that desk, Silas?" Bumpy asked. His voice was smooth and low, carrying through the room like a cold breeze. "You told the public that I hunt the helpless. You said I use the desperate. You called me a bloodsucker." Bumpy reached into his blazer one more time. Silas jumped, his eyes darting toward the guards who were frozen in the dark corners of the room. But Bumpy didn't pull a gun. He pulled out a tiny, folded scrap of paper. It wasn't a notebook, it was a betting receipt. "I have a friend over in the West End," Bumpy went on, smoothing the paper onto the edge of Silas's expensive oak desk. "His name is Vinny. You're familiar with Vinny, aren't you, Silas?" Silas opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His throat felt like it was full of sand. He knew Vinny. Anyone in the city with a bad habit knew Vinny. "Vinny is a businessman, just like me," Bumpy said, turning his head to look straight into the camera lens, speaking to the millions at home. "He gives loans to men who spend more than they earn. Men who need to look rich, who wear high-end blazers and drive fancy sports cars, even though they're 4 months behind on their bills." Bumpy looked back at Silas. "You talk about the street lottery like it's a tragedy. You act disgusted by a grandma betting a few cents to buy her grandkids shoes. But you, Mr. Thorne, you love the horse races, don't you? You love the track at Churchill Downs. And you love the secret high-stakes poker games at the Grand Hotel." Silas finally found his voice, but it was a shaky, panicked rasp. "Stop this. This is a lie. I'll take you to court for this." "It's only a lie if it isn't true, Silas," Bumpy said, tapping the scrap of paper. "This is a bill from last Tuesday. $100,000. That is exactly what you owe Vinny. And you know what happens to important men when they can't pay back people like him? They get very, very desperate. They start searching for an escape. They look for a massive scoop or a surge in viewers, anything to trick their bosses into giving them a raise so they can pay off the loan sharks before their bones get crushed." A massive gasp echoed through the room as the audience realized this wasn't just a claim, it was a total teardown. Bumpy was stripping away the layers of Silas's fake life and showing everyone the decay inside. "You didn't invite me here to tell the truth about my neighborhood," Bumpy said, his voice turning cold and sharp. "You brought me here to save your own neck. You thought if you shamed Bumpy Johnson, if you killed the legend of the scary man on live TV, you'd be the pride of the city. You'd get your big check and pay off Vinny. You aren't a reporter, Mr. Thorne. You're an addict. You're a desperate gambler trying to pay your debts with my name." Silas was trembling now, shaking so hard everyone could see it. Sweat rolled down his face, washing away his stage makeup. He looked at the lens, then at Bumpy, his eyes begging. He was silently crying out for mercy, hoping Bumpy would stop before he was completely ruined. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't in the business of mercy. He dealt in justice. And on the streets, justice was final. "You brought up my little girl," Bumpy stated. The air in the studio felt like it froze. "You asked if she was embarrassed by me. You asked if my money could change who she is." Bumpy stood up. He rose slowly, standing tall until he looked down on the sitting newsmen like a giant. He picked up the betting slip and tossed it into Silas's lap. "My daughter knows exactly who her father is," Bumpy declared. "She knows I am a man of my word. She knows I pay what I owe. And she knows I would never ever sell my heart to a shark just to buy a blazer I couldn't pay for." Bumpy leaned down until he was inches from Silas's face. The reporter could smell the cigar, the mint, and the overwhelming scent of pure authority. "My child sleeps like a baby at night, Silas. But your boy, when he goes to class tomorrow and the other kids ask him why his dad is a liar who owes money to criminals, I wonder if he will be the one feeling ashamed." Silas snapped. "Turn it off. Cut the cameras," he shrieked, his voice hitting a high, panicked note. He scrambled back so fast his chair flipped over, leaving him crawling on the shiny studio floor. "Shut it down. End the feed. Cops. Get this man away from me," Silas screamed. He was sprawled on the tiles, his pricey blazer twisted around him, pointing a trembling hand at Bumpy. He looked miserable. He looked tiny. The titan of the newsroom, the most trusted man in town, had been reduced to a scared kid having a meltdown in the mud. Finally, the red light on the lens went dark. The screen cut away to a soap commercial, but the hit had already landed. 5 million people had watched Silas Thorne's world vanish. They had seen the boss of the South Side stand like a mountain while the perfect citizen turned to dust. In the sudden shadows of the room, everything went wild. The floor manager scrambled toward the stage. The guards, finally snapping out of their shock, rushed the set with their hands on their belts. "Mr. Johnson," the head guard shouted, though he sounded a lot less tough than he did earlier. "You have to get out of here right now." Bumpy didn't even acknowledge the guard. He just looked down at Silas, who was struggling to get to his feet, his palms sliding on the shiny floor. Bumpy reached into his suit one last time. Silas recoiled again, waiting for a blade or a pistol. Instead, Bumpy pulled out a fresh, sharp $100 bill. He let it drop, and it landed right on Silas's chest. "That's for a taxi," Bumpy said. "Since Vinny is probably picking up your keys tonight." Bumpy turned his back on the mess. He straightened his sleeves, tightened his tie, and began his walk toward the door. Mace and Slim appeared from the shadows, falling into place beside him like steel shields. They moved together in a solid line, cutting through the frantic office workers like a knife. The crowd in the seats, who had been dead quiet the whole time, started to shift. Then, in a single wave, they all stood up. Nobody booed. Nobody clapped. They just watched him leave with a look of pure shock and respect. They had come to see a beast in a cage. They were going home having seen a man with a level of pride they couldn't even imagine. By the time Bumpy reached the front hall, the mood of the building had flipped. The lady at the desk wasn't faking a smile anymore, she was staring at him with her mouth open. The doorman, who hadn't wanted to touch the car earlier, now sprinted ahead. He held the spinning door open and gave a deep, nervous bow. "Have a safe trip home, Mr. Johnson," the doorman stuttered, sweat dripping down his neck. Bumpy stopped for a second. He looked the man in the eye. "You as well, young man. Remember not to judge things by their appearance. Sometimes the wrapping is pricey, but the box is empty." They stepped out into the freezing night. The wind was still howling down the wide avenues, but Bumpy didn't feel the chill. He felt the warmth of a wind glowing in his chest. They climbed into the back of the heavy car, and the thick door closed with a solid thud, blocking out the city's roar. For a long stretch, the car was silent as they headed north, the city lights turning into colorful streaks against the glass. Mace was the first to speak. He let out a long, slow whistle. "Bumpy," Mace said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've seen you do some heavy things. I've seen you break bones and order hits. But that was a straight-up execution. You ended him without even laying a finger on him." In the front seat, Slim was chuckling, a dry, raspy sound. "Did you see his expression when you dropped that betting slip? I truly thought his heart was going to stop right there on the carpet." "End the show. End the show." Slim mocked Silas's high-pitched, panicked voice. Bumpy lit up a new cigar. "He destroyed himself, Mace. I just held up the mirror. Men like Silas build their lives on shaky ground. They believe that because they have money, fame, and the right skin color, the rules don't apply. They think they can look down on us. But the law of gravity hits everyone. The higher you build a tower made of lies, the louder it crashes when someone pulls out the base." "How did you get that receipt?" Mace asked. "Vinny usually keeps his business a secret." Bumpy smiled into the shadows of the car. "Vinny does keep things quiet. But he also works in an area that touches my turf. He needed a hand last week with a labor leader who was making trouble. I took care of it for him, So he owed me one. When I saw Silas Thorne's name on that invite, I made a phone call. I asked Vinny if our friend Silas had any unpaid bills. Vinny was happy to trade that information for a clean slate with me. So you bought his debt, Slim said. I bought his life, Bumpy corrected him. And tonight, I cashed the check. The vehicle crossed into the old neighborhood, and the vibe of the city shifted once more. The cold tension of the business district faded, replaced by the lively, tough, and beating heart of the South Side. People were out on the sidewalks despite the freezing air. As the car rolled down the main street, Bumpy saw something that surprised him. People were shouting for him. They were standing on the corners, pointing at his car and cheering. A group of teenagers outside a billiard hall raised their fists in a sign of respect. They had watched the show. They had witnessed Bumpy Johnson step into the predator's cage and come out holding the pelt. For decades, the newspapers and TV stations had told them they were worthless, that they were nothing but thugs and second-class citizens. But tonight, a man from their own streets had stepped onto the big stage and proved that brainpower and strength weren't reserved for people with white skin. Bumpy watched the crowd through the glass. He didn't wave or blow kisses. He wasn't a politician hunting for votes. He was a monarch returning from a successful war. Yet, his gaze grew kind. He had done it for his own pride, and he'd done it for his daughter, Maya. But in the process, he had given the South Side a win they had been starving for. When he finally walked into his home, Maya was waiting. She was on the couch, and the TV was still buzzing. The network had thrown on an old comedy show, desperate to cover up the mess left behind by Silas's total collapse. Maya stood up as her father entered. She was in her robe, her hair tucked into a scarf. Her eyes were puffy, but the tears had stopped. She stared at the man the papers called a criminal, the man Silas had tried to paint as a savage. "You didn't have to go that far," she whispered. "Now he'll hate you forever." Bumpy handed his heavy coat to Mace, who slipped into the kitchen to give them some space. Bumpy walked over to Maya and looked at her face, a face that reminded him so much of her mother. It was a face he would destroy the entire world to keep safe. "He already despised me, honey," Bumpy said softly. "He hated me long before I stepped into that studio. He hated me just for breathing. What I did tonight wasn't about his feelings. It was about making sure he, and everyone else, respects you." "He said such awful things," Maya said, her voice shaking. "About me, about our family." "He said what was in his heart," Bumpy replied. "And the whole world saw him for what he really is. They saw his malice, and then they saw how weak he was. You can't kill prejudice, Maya. It's like a weed that grows in the dark. But you can drag it out into the sun. You can shine a light so hot on it that it shrivels up." Tonight, Silas Thorne learned that if you want to throw stones, you shouldn't do it when you live in a house made of glass. Suddenly, the telephone rang. It was a loud, piercing sound in the silent room. Bumpy looked at it, knowing exactly who was on the other end. It would be the other crime lords, the city officials, and the power players, all buzzing to find out if Bumpy Johnson had really just executed a man's career on national television. Bumpy didn't move to answer it. He sat on the sofa beside his daughter. "Shut it off," he said, nodding toward the TV. Maya turned the knob, killing the noise of the outside world. "Did you really give him money for a taxi?" she asked, a tiny smile finally appearing on her face. Bumpy laughed. "I did. A man ought to show a little kindness to those who have fallen on hard times." The aftermath was fast, harsh, and complete. By sunrise the following day, Silas Thorne wasn't just out of work, he was toxic. Before the city even woke up, the station put out a notice saying Silas had stepped down immediately for medical reasons. They tore his name off the building and ripped his photos off the walls. The news about his secret gambling life hit every paper in town. From the tabloids to the big city journals, everyone was talking about the reporter's double life. The discovery of his two-faced behavior killed any pity people might have felt for him. If Bumpy had used his fists, Silas would have been seen as a victim or a hero attacked by a criminal. But because Bumpy used the facts, Silas was an outcast. He was the man who lectured the world on right and wrong while hiding in the mud. Silas lost his penthouse. He lost his luxury car. His wife packed up and left within days, taking the kids to her family's place in another state. He attempted to start a lawsuit, but not a single attorney would touch him. The proof was too strong, and more importantly, nobody wanted to face Bumpy Johnson in a courtroom. 3 weeks later, Bumpy was enjoying a steak at a local spot. The place was packed, filled with the aroma of good food and the laughter of the neighborhood's finest. The jukebox was humming a smooth jazz tune. The vibe was warm, cozy, and triumphant. Slim walked in, shaking the water off his umbrella. He slid into the seat across from Bumpy. "You get the news about Thorn?" Slim asked, pouring a drink. "I don't spend my time reading the gossip," Bumpy replied, cutting into his meal. "It's not in the papers," Slim said. "I spotted him downtown near the bus station." Bumpy stopped, his fork in mid-air. "And he's in bad shape," Slim noted. "His clothes were a mess. Looked like he hadn't touched a razor in a week. He was trying to talk his way into a backroom poker game at a sandwich shop. They kicked him out. Told him his name wasn't worth a cent." Bumpy chewed his food slowly. He took a sip of his wine. "Did he mention me?" "No," Slim said. "But he looked scared to death. He keeps checking behind him. I think he's waiting for you to send a hitman to wrap things up." Bumpy shook his head. "There is no point in finishing a job that's already over. A man like that can only survive if he has people watching him. Without an audience, he's already gone. Without the lens, without that leather seat, and without people looking up to him, he's already gone. He's just a spirit wandering through a city that has already erased his memory." "Still," Slim said with a wide grin, "it was something else. The most famous moment of regret in history. The guys on the street are still buzzing about it. My child sleeps like a baby. Does yours? Man, that line really hit home." Bumpy cleaned his mouth with a cloth. He looked out the window at the rain-washed streets of the South Side. He watched the people passing by, the ones who worked hard, the ones who struggled, and the ones who had been told for generations that they weren't as good as men like Silas Thorn. "He asked the wrong thing," Bumpy said in a low voice. "He wanted to know if my daughter felt shame. He should have asked if I felt fear. Because if he had asked that, I would have given him a real answer." "And what's that?" Slim asked. Bumpy looked at his friend, his eyes sharp and steady. "The reality is, I'm not scared of the law. I'm not scared of the rival bosses. And I'm definitely not scared of a man holding a mic. The only thing I'm afraid of is a world where my daughter thinks she has to bow her head to anybody. And as long as I'm alive, I'll make sure that world never becomes a reality." He waved the waiter over for the bill. "Let's move," Bumpy said, standing up and setting his hat just right. "We've got business to handle. The street lottery doesn't run on its own, and I think Vinny might be looking for a new partner over in the West End. I hear there's a sudden opening in the news business." They walked out of the restaurant and into the dark. The boss of the neighborhood and his team left the memory of Silas Thorn far behind in the shadows, a warning to anyone who dared to think Bumpy Johnson's quiet nature was a sign of weakness. The city kept moving, but the lesson stayed in the air. You can try to take down the man in charge, but you better be sure you don't miss. And you should never, ever disrespect his family. If you enjoyed this story of Bumpy Johnson's legendary wit, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We love hearing from you. Drop a comment below and let us know your favorite part of the showdown. Don't miss out on our next deep dive into the streets. Turn on those notifications.